It's Friday morning, heading into a weekend, and you're going to be very busy along with our colleague Alec Lazenby over there in Victoria for the NDP convention. What are you expecting?
I think there'll be a fair amount of discussion about the past year. The New Democrats, as you know, almost lost the last election, and there's a lot of issues out there that are controversial. The opinion polls suggest that if an election were held today, the New Democrats would be reelected. So how unhappy could they be given that prospect?
For sure. I see. Obviously, there'll be a speech or a short one, anyways, by the president of the BC Federation of Labor, I guess, which is sort of traditional. Yeah. What are you expecting to hear? Anything there that's an interesting time for the NDP with Labor?
You know, I think the government relief yesterday. The BCGEU approved the new contract 89%. If the government had stuck to its hard line with the public sector unions, you know, they started off offering them 3.5% over 2 years. They ended up settling for 12 over 4. The dollar cost is triple of that. So if the government hadn't sweetened the offer to the unions, I think there might have been some grumbling at the convention about that. But I think that GEU vote tells me that the government managed to diffuse that. The premier, I think, yesterday as well, Harold, good news for the government. The prime minister was out here announcing 2 more major projects, and David Eby is rightly saying, look, half of the big projects, or almost half of the big projects that the prime minister says are necessary for the future growth of the country are here in British Columbia. The premier said that was what was going to happen, and it turns out that is what's going to happen. So again, I think, you know, I think you watch how the NDP has approached this convention, and it's like somebody had a little checklist and went through and said, we better deal with this, we better deal with this, we better deal with this. Yesterday, again, improvement in benefits for folks on disabilities. Well, it turns out, Harold, that one of the issues before the convention, one of the policy motions, was to improve the lot of people on disabilities. So one of the things that always jumps out to me with the NDP is how well they manage their own conventions. I'll give you one example. One of the motions on the list, there's almost 400 policy motions before this convention. One of the motions calls on the NDP to cancel the ferry contract with the Chinese and build the ships here. The NDP manages the convention. They push motions like that so far down the list, they'll never, ever get called if the convention were to meet for a month. There is a motion, however, on the list, number 1 on the economic and jobs list, that calls for the government in future to build ferries in British Columbia, and the federal government in future to bring in a tariff so that ships can't be built offshore. So that's government policy, is going forward. We're going to build the ferries here, but there's no attempt, there's no option, no mention of embarrassing the government by calling it on it to cancel the contract with China. So there's a lot of that in the list of motions. The party, you know, it's open to debate, but you can manage some of that by pushing motions down the list, by consolidating motions into things that aren't as controversial. And I think they'll be careful on that. David Eby does face a leadership vote here, Harold. Last time, 92%. I don't think he'll hit that number this time. But if you look at the opinion polls, which say that even though the public is unhappy with some of the things that the government's done and doesn't think it's made enough progress, the opinion polls also say that if an election were held, the New Democrats and David Eby would be reelected. So I'm joking, Harold, that the one motion that isn't on the list for this convention is, do you support John Rustad remaining as leader of the Conservatives? I think
that would get unanimous consent, I would think. At that
privately, point, New Democrats can't believe their good fortune that when the public is unhappy on some issues, the opposition is divided between conservatives who want Rustad to stay, conservatives who want Rustad to go, conservatives who've been fired by Rustad, and conservatives who've quit the party over Rustad. So what's that, 3-4 political parties out there on the opposition? NDP can't believe their good fortune.
How much concerns do you expect to hear over the weekend from within the party about the rising debt and deficit under
David? I'm going to have to go over that list of 387 motions again, Harold. I don't recall seeing anything on the list that expressed the slightest concern about the debt or the deficit, about the rising interest rates. The government, as you know, claims it has a plan to balance the budget. We've not really seen it, but no, this is not a party that, even though the previous leader of the NDP, yes, John Horgan, believed in balanced budgets and left a surplus behind him. I'll have to look over that list again, but I don't recall any concern at all.
The Heritage Conservation Act, when last we heard, there was going to be 6 weeks of consultation with local government to deal with some of their concerns, and you were writing about it today. How's that going?
Yeah, the Premier went to the Union of BC Municipalities annual convention this year, and he heard a lot of concern from local governments saying that they'd been presented what they regarded as a fait accompli. So the Heritage Conservation Act's been around since the 1990s, not amended. There are recognized to be a lot of problems with it. We're upset that you're going to load us with all these extra costs to do this and assess heritage and archaeological sites, and not providing us with any money. So the Premier at the Union of BC Municipalities Convention in September said, I hear you, and we're going to extend the period for consultations. That period ends today, Friday. Union of BC Municipalities came out with a report this week saying, we spent a lot of time studying this stuff, and we still don't think this is going to work. They've said they don't have a problem with the idea of speeding up permitting. They wish that would happen. I guess at some point, whether the Premier is going to be persuaded. He did say in September that he would listen to the feedback and he wouldn't impose these changes on local communities at their expense. So the plan is still, Harold, to rewrite this law and bring it in when the House sits in the spring. I guess we'll see whether the Premier is really going to listen or whether we're going to go ahead on this. But that report from local government, which is on their website, if people want to read it, runs 19 pages. It's pretty alarming. They really looked into this thing in depth, and they just don't think it's going to work. They think it's going to make it even harder.
All right. Thanks, Vaughn. Enjoy the weekend.